Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. I am Beth Brodowski, and I am thrilled to be here today with Bill Furmansky. Bill is the Senior Director of Communications at Fair Labor Association out of Washington, D.C. And for those of you who are new here, I am the president of Iris Creative Group. I'm actually going to stop my share and turn off our slides because we really just have the slides today as a bit of a backdrop to kind of pop in when we need to kind of help illustrate the points that Bill and I are going to be talking about today. So I am thrilled to have everybody joining here. I'm going to just kind of ease in for a couple of minutes as we have lots of people signed up and people are still sort of jumping on. But Bill, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey Beth, thanks for having me.
So I just want to say hi, check your audio, make sure everybody can hear us both. If anybody has any trouble hearing both Bill and myself, please let us know. But I think we're in good shape. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the Fair Labor Association's transition to a new brand. And I would start off with, there's a lot of you here on today. Has anybody been through this? Have any of you that are on today, just pop into the chat and tell us, have you been through a brand transition? Are you going through one right now? Are you thinking of rebranding? And so getting some insight on the opportunity and pain. Oh, that's interesting that the video is lagging a little bit. Thanks so much for letting me know. Hopefully that it's only internally that's happening. Yeah, so it's always super helpful for people for us to have a sense of like, where are you all? What are you thinking about? So I'm going to have Bill start off with telling us a little bit about the project that they did. Why this was even a value for Fair Labor Association. So as people are joining us, Bill, why don't you warm us up with telling us a little bit about Fair Labor and what was going on there that made the organization think this was a worthy endeavor and worth the time and energy that it takes to do.
That sounds great, Beth. Thanks for having me today, and I appreciate everyone taking a moment from their Prime Day shopping to join us, and maybe you'll shop as we talk today. Fair Labor Association is an international nonprofit. It's based in Washington, D.C., but we work throughout the world, and we promote human rights at work. We bring together universities, companies, and civil society organizations and hold companies accountable for the working conditions in farms and factories around the world. Our goal is to improve labor rights and uphold labor standards for the people that make your clothes and harvest your food and make products that you buy every day. And I am the organization's first communications director. I joined in September of 2018. And they hired a communications director as part of a strategic planning process that had a goal to make the organization more public facing. The organization's been around for more than 20 years and has been doing terrific work. Companies are voluntarily changing their purchasing practices and upholding standards in their factories, but nobody knew the story of fair labor. So when I joined, my assessment was that it was really a good idea to begin a branding process that would lay the foundation for the organization to speak to consumers, to recruit new companies, and to convince investors in socially responsible spaces that the work that our companies and members are doing is really making an impact to improve workers' lives.
And I think that's so helpful. And to give you all a sense of where Bill's organization was, let me, of course, now this is, and let me see if I can get this to show. Now, here it is, it's over here. I'm going to share my screen again, and we've got a couple of these slides for you. So we're going to share here. So, there we go. So this is where Bill's brand was when we first got connected. So Bill, why don't you talk a little bit about your concerns, the impression that you were making, that both from the branding and strategy concerns, but also the technical mechanics of marketing concerns that you were having.
Sure, Beth, happy to do that. So what you're seeing there are some of the pieces that existed with our old brand. And even these include a little bit of improvement that I made when I first joined to help sort of open things up. But as you can see, we used, prior to my joining the organization, used a lot of red. So heavy blocks, big red, very tightly and dense text. We had a lot of information we wanted to share, and we put everything in the kitchen sink in all of our documents, which made it, in my view, sort of hard to digest, hard to break through. And in big picture, it felt, a lot of our materials and even our logo felt a little bit dated to me. And I couldn't, at the beginning, even get a clear understanding of the story behind our logo. Like, where did it come from? Why was it developed? Why is it red, blue, and yellow? What did that symbol mean? And so when you don't have a story behind your branding and it's almost 20 years old, it might be time to try a refresh. And as we were planning to turn the corner, that made a lot of sense. And so we began that process in the beginning of 2019.
You know, it's so funny. I actually just did a session last week on, are you ready for a rebrand? And one of the things that I talked about is a lot of times people rebrand because it's their anniversary or because there's a new leader or, you know, they just don't like stuff or different things. My feeling is there's really only two reasons to rebrand. One is you have someplace you need to go and the current stuff that you have isn't going to get you there. Or you've already gone there, you've become a different organization, you've grown, you've changed, you've added, and the right people aren't coming along with you. Like, it's not currently telegraphing your current position. And sometimes anniversaries are they're a great anchor. A new leader is a great milestone, a moment. But if there's not a good why behind it, that really comes down to, are we sending the right message to the right people? This is an awful lot of work just because, you know, I don't really like three colors, right? There has to be something more than that. And I love that you talked about all the, like, it wasn't just that it's like, I don't think that's pretty, you know, that there's more meat to a decision like this. And a lot of what we're going to talk to people about today is, you know, so you decide, you make this decision to change the logo. What happens then? And one of the things that you were talking about is how, you know, these documents are super, super wordy. It's, you start with a change in a logo, but getting down to the point where your overall documents look better, work better, are better connected to your audience often requires operational change that may be really uncomfortable for people. So in your organization, how did you get people comfortable with, I mean, reducing the amount of type and copy and words that go into something is often like heart-wrenching for people. How did you begin to get people to see that this change needed to happen in a bigger way than we need a new logo?
So, I mean, and the reasons we changed are a hybrid of exactly what you just said, Beth. The organization had changed over 2 decades, and our brand maintenance and management hadn't kept up. And we weren't really ready to connect with, and this brand and identity really wasn't prepared to take us where we needed to go. And so with that in mind, I proposed the idea of a rebrand, a new logo, and a new look for the organization. And we started with brand strategy. So we took our time, we brought in a vendor, we thought through our audiences in a very clear way, some of which had been outlined in the strategic plan. So that helped us, that tool really helped us. You do the strategic plan, you use those audiences and personas to build your strategy for your branding. The other thing that was clear to me is we had been so internally focused that no one even knew the brand. So we weren't walking away from a really strong investment where the public or others really knew our logo at the snap. So we knew we weren't risking that much by thinking through our branding. And then we spent the time to figure out, like, what would our positioning be and how do we want to be thought of? And some of those elements, I wasn't there for this brand design, so I don't know if we did the brand strategy. I couldn't find one. Too often people cheat, and the brand strategy is the mission statement. And that mission statements are critical, but they're two totally different things. And so that's where we started. And that got people really energized, that process of thinking through how we describe ourselves and who we are and who we want to be.
And I think to connect people, because it's always hard for people to really kind of picture and imagine, well, what do we mean by brand strategy? So when I introduced Bill in the beginning, and he very quickly and succinctly said, this is Fair Labor Association. This is what we do. This is why we do it. This is how it impacts people. Being able to have great language that can tell that story clearly and in a way that, somebody posted, Christy posted into the chat. That's so awesome. Like, even just from that little bit that you shared, people understood what you did and they got it and could internalize, oh, wow, for the right people, that's a really great message. That's the work. We always say that the brand strategy is the thing that connects your mission to your marketing. It's that bridge of language and clarity and audience focus that lets you get there. So do y'all want to see the new brand that Bill's group came up with? So this is what they used to look like. And then when they changed their logo, they changed it to this. So Bill, talk a little bit about why this logo? What does this logo say about this brand that you're developing?
So for us, this logo says a lot. And embedded in the design are the three, what we call strands. And our organization is made up of 3 caucuses. So that's communicating internally. But that is a really important audience for us, even though our logo really is external. We went with blues because we looked at a landscape map of all our organizations in international labor and labor standards, and blue stands out. There's a lot of reds, there's some greens in sustainability, but blue seemed different, and we were excited about sort of standing out from the crowd. Blue also conveys trust and credibility. Credibility was one of our key terms in our brand strategy. We went with an upper and lowercase fair labor to make it more approachable, because we're worker-centered as an organization. And so we wanted to be more approachable as an organization. The old logo had all caps. This is also a bolder logo than the other logo. Those thin letters, I didn't feel were super memorable, but this gave us sort of a stamp. You can also see we dropped the word association in our mark. We're still called Fair Labor Association, but at the end of the day, we're not a true association. We're an accrediting body of organizations, and we have members, but we thought it was really important to put fair labor front and center. And then the last piece I will talk about is the sort of the feeling of a bit of energy in that icon that moves into fair labor. And for us, that was sort of the forward thinking or the forward movement. And so those elements sort of came to life for us in this. We looked at dozens of different designs and options, and this is the one that just resonated with folks.
Right. And so this is really that kicking off point of our conversation today. So I do lots of sessions on logo development and getting there, but still the context around why the change and what was the change too important. People get really excited about a logo change, about a new logo. It's very energizing. It's very motivating. I always say it's kind of a little bit like, you're going to do an addition on your house or redo your kitchen. And in the beginning, when you're working with the architect, it's super fun. And then you get this great design and you're so excited to deploy it. And that's when you have to start calling the contractor and scheduling things and ordering cabinets and measuring. And somewhere in the middle, things get really complicated. Usually everyone hates each other. And then at the end, you have this amazing thing. But to go from that design to something that's functional is a process. And Bill came to us when they'd already done this logo. They'd gotten to this point and felt like there was a time that they needed a different resource to help implement and deploy the brand than they used to actually develop this logo work. So that's when we really got together. And so, Bill, it's a great point for us to talk about. So from the point that you have this logo, what are some of the things that you have found to be especially Let's start with the positive. What's been amazing about this change? Getting to this point where you have this, and now that we're starting to deploy it, how has this really helped transform the organization?
So one important way that this new logo and the designs behind it have helped transform the organization is consistency. When I arrived, our staff were using 2 different versions of letterhead, completely different versions of boilerplates. There had been no communications department, there'd been no communications director. So it was a bit of a free-for-all. And so being able to sort of start fresh with a new look and a new logo helped lay the groundwork for us to ensure that, like, move towards consistency and get everyone on the same channel. Some people had e-signatures, some people didn't in the old version. Now we all have the same e-signature. I'm not saying that everyone adopted it immediately. I keep an eye out for emails incoming to make sure that our standard e-signature is there, because people have a natural tendency to want to sort of add their own flair to pieces. But consistency has been a really big piece. Another thing is it gave us the opportunity to reinvent some signature pieces that were really important for us. We have a document that we called the Workplace Code of Conduct. It was one of the ones that you saw on the slide before in the middle. And it conveys our most important workplace standards. But it maybe didn't do it as well as it might have. And so we got the chance to rethink the entire document, and not just the design that Iris helped us with it. There you go. We thought about the orientation. Yeah. We thought about the preamble or the intro. The idea here was to open the document up, highlight the most important content, which is our standards and our code element, our workplace code element, and bring that to life in a way that would allow us to better communicate and be more clear about who we are and what we do. And so this is where we landed on reimagining that workplace code of conduct, and which I think we maximize the space. This is often a digital document, so changing the landscape, it was a big conversation, but it was a smart conversation because it allowed us to give the breathing room to the standards that we want.
Right. And it's so interesting, like the title of this session that we're doing today is Going from a Logo to a Look. And I find I often have to teach young graphic designers this concept all the time, that a look doesn't necessarily mean lots of design elements. A lot of times when you bring a graphic designer in, I often say that people want to decorate a space. Like you want to kind of cover that surface with art and design. And we explored those options too. I think I have a couple of examples that are going to show you like a bunch of the different things that we looked at and considered. And ultimately what it came down to is this, even though Bill has done an amazing job of tightening up the language and trimming things down, this is an organization that needs to inform people. There's a lot of language and a lot of words, and we can't just miraculously wave our hands and put like 5 bullet points on a poster and call it a day and feel like we're being effective. And so one of the biggest challenges of design in this transition space is that sometimes like the words are the words, and you have to figure out how can we keep things as consistent as possible, come up with a look that spans and works through all the different kinds that we do. And a lot of times that means, well, let's take the biggest beast first. Interestingly, as Bill's talking about building this consistency, one of the first things that we did to begin to guide us as we came up with what are these things going to look like, we developed what's called a style guide. And any of you that have been here on many of my talks before, you know, we talk about style guides a lot. And I also want to pause at this moment to say, thank you all for coming. There's many of you on here. If you have questions for Bill, things that I have a whole list of questions, I can keep going forever. But if you have questions that you want me to pause and ask Bill about any specific thing that we're talking about, you can pop it into the chat or you can pop it into the Q&A. I'm happy to, like, that's what we're here for today. Ask questions, jump in. You're here to hear from him. And so I want to make sure that you have as much access to getting your specific questions answered as possible. So interestingly, so you saw that the logo had this one big specific font and it was really, really bold. fonts typically come with lots of different weights, but we had to think about, well, is that the only font or do we need different fonts? As we were going to be going in and building out materials, we needed to make sure that we had the typography, the tools that we needed to do the things that he wanted to do. And if you all noticed, he has a logo that's really 3 shades of blue. And so we had to think about, is that it? Do we want to stay with the 3 colors, or do we want an expanded color palette? So in our style guide, we added in and we developed this expanded color palette. And then we had these big plans, like, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan. We've got all these ideas. We don't want to be too limited. And so then we started designing. And so some of the things that we started coming up with is we started working on a PowerPoint design, and we started working on some stationery designs, as Bill was talking about. And, interestingly enough, we started with this PowerPoint design and we came up with all kinds of different graphic elements, lots of different things. Well, do you want this to be the visual hook for the brand? Do you want this? Here's all these different colors. And as we were playing around with the PowerPoint, we didn't have any words. And we hit a point where we realized, you know what, this is not reality. Like this, to come up with design elements on a template of something where we're just kind of imagining future words that will be there is giving us kind of, I hate to say it, but too much freedom. And we were looking at it going, it's nice, but it doesn't feel exactly right. And as we continued to design and design, Bill kept narrowing down. He kept showing things to his team. And ultimately, we ended up getting really narrow. And the look that we created is much simpler than you might actually think of as something that would be a look. But it's important to think about, who are you as an organization? And as much as it might be fun to have lots of colors and lots of graphic elements, that's not always what a look needs to be. This is a pretty streamlined, straightforward look that you're seeing here. We ended up, at least at this moment in time, the core pieces are really leaning into the priority, these 3 blue colors. And so, as you can see, we started with some PowerPoint, some stationery. You saw this piece that we worked with, which this was the piece that we ended up shifting to because we realized working in this vacuum wasn't working. And we decided to pause on that and come and really build out our template with this. And then from here, we were able to get to things like a PowerPoint background. No, yeah, this is actually a Zoom background that we created. And then here's the slide deck. Let me see if I'm getting, yeah, there we go. So there's still a lot of interesting graphics that come out of it. I mean, the funny decisions that we had to make, Bill, if you remember all the conversations we had about the graphic part of the logo, the icon, and what are we actually going to let people do with it? Are we going to be able to use it in full color, in black and white? And these are things that when you create that core logo, you might not even think that you have to have conversations about. Can we use it, as you can see on this transition slide and on the Zoom backgrounds? Are we going to allow ourselves and others to use this graphic as a design element? And if so, how? And then you can see here, we still brought in that expanded color palette for things like graphs and charts, but we really reeled it back in for that. And so, Bill, as we're going through this, how did you decide, out of all the gazillion pieces that you need to work on, how did you decide which ones would be the things that would be seminal pieces for you? These are the core pieces that we know we need to first bring through this transition so that you could use them to help both make the decisions that you needed to make, but also have, a key set of tools for you to begin to work with.
So what I will say is the designs you looked at and where we landed really reflect our brand strategy, which includes the words pragmatic, rigorous, and credible. We're not fancy toot your horn and dance kind of organization. We're serious and we're staid. And so that's where we landed on that. As we were thinking about which materials to sort of bring to life first, the no-brainer is always your stationery. And even this was during the pandemic. So while we didn't need business cards to go at a meeting or letterhead.
Who's using a business card?
But we did start there with those elements. But the thing that I think you really want to lean in first on are the templates. because the templates are the tools that empower your staff to use the new brand moving forward. So things like a letterhead, things like a memo template, things like the Zoom background. Like if staff were creating their own Zoom backgrounds, because this was the pandemic, if staff are creating it on their own with our old logo, that's a sign that you're going to need it with the new logo. And so we put that towards the front of the list because we knew people were eager to use a Zoom background so they didn't have to show off their bedroom or wherever they were Zooming from. And then I think, Beth, we landed on that Fair Labor Code because it's an essential piece communicating our standards that all of our brands use. And we end up using that and then translating it into almost a dozen languages. And so that is a signature piece for us. It also gave us the elbow room to play with the design without relying heavily on photos or images or icons, because we weren't quite there. And so you have to sort of look at your reality. We couldn't send freelancers out to get photos around the world because there was a pandemic. And so we had to sort of work with what we had and get as much done as we could with, a parking lot of things that we know we'll do in the future.
And I think that's so important too, to like really think through that about, you've got a new logo, what needs to happen now, what needs to happen in the next sort of couple of months afterwards. I often tell people to look at, what events are coming up, and then what can safely wait and be transitioned over time. One of the things that we talk about a lot to help people prep for doing something like this is to do a communication audit. And, any of you that are here today, you're on our email list. So, we're actually going to be teaching a class on developing a communication audit. How do you really look at all of your materials together so that you have a sense of what you have, where the problems are? How much did you look at what was going on and where was it helpful for you?
So as we outlined, I was brand new. So everything was a learning curve for me, which has its pros and cons. But in terms of a communications audit, it was really good because I had eyes on everything and I was super attentive to what was going on. And so there was a lot of things I didn't know, but when I learned something, we have more than 8 types of reports that we publish. And those trickled out one by one. No one sat me in orientation and said, hey, here are the 8 types of reports we have. So I had to learn that on my own. So you need to be a sponge. You need to keep sort of a diary of things that are going on. And then over time, I'm a big bucket lister. So I'm like, oh, those are all the reports. Oh, those are the materials that go to our members. Oh, those are our digital pieces. And so I would keep this massive list and then bucket them. And even after months of doing this, there were still things that popped out that I had no idea existed, especially in an old brand where people created things on their own. And so you have to expect the unexpected when you're doing a communications audit. But I feel like I had a pretty good sense of what was the most critical and overall the scope of work, which is still ongoing and a very long list. But you've just got to, based on what you're doing and the list that you create in those buckets, then you can prioritize from there.
Yeah, I think a big question that a lot of people have, and if you guys have specific questions, pop it in here. I see this one all the time. Once you've got a new brand and then you've started to get a few of these templates, some organizations set themselves up so that every single thing has to come through the communications person, which, as a control freak, I love that. But you, like probably many people that are here today, are my beloved /marketers, meaning you're the guy. You got to be, graphics, copy, website updates, email. You kind of have to do a little bit of everything. And so if you're going to take the, circle the wagons approach, that means all that work is on you. If you're going to allow people to do things, it really helps with workflow. But, I'm sure many of us have been in the back of a room where somebody's got a PowerPoint going and you look at the slide and you think, oh my gosh, what have they done? So how are you balancing workload, control factors, and deciding what and how and if to disseminate and allow people to touch things on their own? These are all the decisions once you transition a brand. what are you doing?
I'm a control freak, so this whole thing freaks me out a little bit, like letting go, like watching your child sort of go out into the world. I look at it from sort of big picture that, and you all know this, but during a brand rollout, these three things are sort of on steroids. It's my job is to be like the brand champion, model best practices and best behavior, be the brand coach, help people learn and understand what the brand means and how to do it, and then also be the brand cop. Sometimes like pull somebody over and say, hey, wait, that's not exactly right, but then help them make it right. And if you can do those three things in sort of appropriate ways, you can allow your colleagues to do it. And one thing that's important is tap into the momentum and the excitement around the rebrand. My colleagues are really excited for this. They wanted it to happen. They knew a logo was coming. I think if you can demystify the process for them, I think that really helps, because share the stories, share some of the struggles. We took some time to figure out the right fonts, and it had to be a font that was accessible for everyone and not like a font that was expensive. And so we had to choose fonts and colors that made sense. And then just make sure you educate the training sessions, the do's and don'ts lists, the frequently asked questions, a home on Microsoft Teams where there's access to the templates and language and elements like that. And so creating resources and then ongoing training, and then just being vigilant, like just watching for things, watching for trends. I did see a trend where our e-signatures, people were modifying them for replies because they felt they were too long. And so having a discussion internally and figuring that out, those are really helpful things.
And I think that's really huge too, because, we all plan these things in a vacuum, and then they go out into the world and start being implemented, and you will start to see people changing things. And like one approach is a hand slap to say, don't do that. But a better approach is tell me why you felt you needed to change that, and how can we give you a better tool and maybe adjust. Sometimes it's okay, well, these were the rules, but we have to change the rules because the rules that we had didn't work. So it's always this interesting balance of narrowing the cattle chutes, opening them. If you make those cattle chutes too narrow and people can't do what they need to do, they're going to go rogue, and you're going to see the rainbow transition slide that somebody had their 12-year-old help them do because they couldn't make the thing that you wanted to do work. And if you make it too wide, all of this money and effort of rebranding, it's just not going to add up to as much as it could because it gets too watered down. I'm curious, you were talking about that everyone was really excited. How did you get people to the point where they were actually excited for this change? You came in and were like, oh, things need to change. But how did you get to the point where people were motivated and excited enough so that when you said, we're going to take away something that you had before and give you something new, different, that they were like, okay, yes, because sometimes people cling to what they had with their life.
So this was a unique case where I think most of my colleagues felt it was time for a brand change. So I didn't have to fight that fight, but in terms of good. Like creating like the teaser or the drama, this process took a lot longer than I would have liked it to. And that's just sort of a natural progression of developing a brand, choosing colors, working through sort of the particulars of designs and elements and things like that. Like, for instance, when we were doing business cards, the issues came up that we have to rethink department names and staff titles. It also, the business card development and the e-signature development opened up a conversation about adding personal pronouns to those materials. So these are really important conversations that at the end of the day aren't a communications conversation, but they certainly had to be dealt with as part of this process, which delayed everything. But the delay, the 18 months it took to get some of this stuff done, created sort of this, excitement under the collar as people waited for this to happen. And so that ended up, I think, working in my favor. And then it was just a collective sigh of relief. And then when people saw, like, showing them the new Zoom backgrounds, and people use them, and I love it because they're really happy with them. those things that people are really proud of the change and they're really on board with it. So it wasn't as hard as it might have been to get people to use the new brand.
Exactly. And so anybody that's been here before know that we talk about this brand strategy process we talk about it as the concept of AMY: audience, message, image, and experience. And this brand transition that Bill's going through now lives in this idea and this section of experience. And I think, Bill, the experience that you had of, oh, we're ready to put our copy on the business card. This is making us now question, who are we? What do we think about it? It's so easy to think that you've now done all the brand strategy. So check. When you actually start putting it into real pieces, it's amazing how much it still gives you, we'll go with opportunities to like reevaluate your culture and who you are, because that experience and how you embed the new brand internally into your culture is very connected with how it's going to go out into your community. So Bill, like, as you're going through this, what compromises did you have to make in order to kind of keep things moving and get things executed, and just to be like, okay, this is where we need to be right now?
Yeah, so I think it's human nature that people don't pay attention to things until until it's right in front of their face. And so that's sort of the genesis behind the personal pronouns and the department names. We had to make some compromises on color. And the colors are really important, but people would zero in on one of the colors in the palette and not look at the palette holistically. And that creates a challenge, because when you've got a set of colors in a palette, they all rely on one another in different ways. And so having to push through and get people to think of this as a palette, not as single color. Also being aware of accessibility issues, especially online for certain colors. You want to be aware of that and make sure that you're compromising so that the colors that you're using are sort of exactly what will work for people who have vision impairment and things like that. The other thing is sometimes people needed templates that we didn't plan for. As I said, they pop up out of nowhere. I actually used the letterhead template that Iris created and then built a couple of interim templates on the fly using my sort of Adobe skills just to get us through, especially for pieces that were low risk or internal, like an internal memo template. And so we did that internally without the expert graphic designers at Iris, so that I had those materials and they would be usable. With my secret plan is to, zhuzh them up down the line when we have time and space.
Awesome. All right, Bill, we're starting to get some questions coming in, so I'm going to pitch a few of those to you. Lisa is asking, who got to weigh in on the design development? Like, how did you put your team together of who got to have a horse in the game?
So my personal nature is to put it in front of as many people as possible, because I think that creates that openness and also that excitement about it. In this process, it was our communications committee, which are representatives of our board of directors, and our senior staff team, and then select individual staff members depending upon the product and the people who use it. So like the Fair Labor Code document, that would be people that work in accountability to make sure, because that's one of their signature pieces. What I would say about that structuring feedback is it's really important to, when you're sending something out for review, make sure you remind people of the purpose of the document and why it's changing, and explain where it fits in the library of all your other documents. Rather than just shooting it out by email and just saying, hey, what do you think? Pose specific questions.
Yeah. Because unfortunately, they will answer that question.
But if you pose specific questions, and put a deadline on responses. If people sometimes don't respond immediately. And so Beth knows that some of our response times were elongated. And I think, our designer was like, hey, are they still around? Did they get COVID? Where are they? Because we were so slow in responding.
So, right.
putting a deadline on that, I think, is really helpful. And the thing I would say most of the time is, this is mostly because of the pandemic, a lot of the feedback was via email, but if you can create a live conversation, whether it's on Zoom or in person, to just talk people through, you get much better input and insights, because the risk of crisscrossing things by emails is much greater.
Oh my gosh, I so agree. And it's always tricky. Lisa, this is a really good question. Like, who do you let weigh in on what things should look like? Volunteers can be tricky sometimes because they're not professionals. They're not people that actually have to use these documents. So they often come in with like ideas. So Bill's idea of like putting constraints around, we're asking you specific input on this specific thing, is very helpful when you have something like a communications committee that you, out of respect and organizational structure, need to have part of this conversation. The other thing that I would also tell you, especially if you're bringing in stakeholders or volunteers or people into your world that maybe aren't the people that have to create it, is be very clear on what your role is. We structure our branding projects with, we've got our leadership team that's working on the project. We've got our working group that might be part of like committees and workshops and things, but then we have a whole separate group that we call the brand deciders. You might also have some brand ambassadors that aren't actually doing work, that are, let's get our bigger community to weigh in. But you want to use those people carefully, because they're going to be a little bit more of the everyone, and everyone are going to want you to add starbursts onto things. So making it very clear to the people that you bring in to weigh in on, your job is to give us input versus your job is to have the final say. Setting expectations does so much to help people be excited and happy about their contribution, and understanding where the limits of their power are. Because it can be tricky. The other key tip I would give to you all is, if there is anyone in the matrix whose opinion can make the project go back to square one, you've got to get their opinion early. So many times we've had clients that say, well, we don't want to show it to the executive director until it's done. Well, if the executive director hates it, if you're doing any sort of creative design project, like, the money is in the beginning in concept. As you go down through revisions, time is spent. You get down to this, like, now we have enough money left to like get rid of, like, fix the commas, put the periods in, and oh shoot, that picture's not lined up. There's not money after 3 or 4 rounds to go back and rethink things. And so you got to really think about where I hate to say where the power is in your organization. And it may be where you expect it in the normal, like, president, vice president chain of command. It may be places you don't expect it in, somebody on the board, in, hate to say it, someone's spouse, in line workers. We had a situation once where we redid a logo, and the wife got involved and really wanted it to be a flower. And then when the labor team got the look of the new logo, they said, we're not wearing a flower. And we had to go all the way back to square one. So you don't know where that power is until you've really thought it through. So think about if there's anybody in that line that could say, let's do a drastic rollback change. You've got to get them involved early. We have another question, Bill, from Leslie, who's asking, what's one thing a small org with no communications budget or staff, I'm a volunteer, can do to improve their brand? Because you got to start somewhere. Yes, Leslie, you got to start somewhere. So not everybody has a full-time Bill on staff, or the ability to bring in a strategic and creative firm like ours. Bill, where would you say is a great place for someone to start looking?
So, I don't know what the current brand is, and I made this mistake coming to Fair Labor. I didn't immediately try to enforce the existing brand, the old brand, because I thought, oh, we're gonna have a new brand in no time. I'll just let people do what they're doing. The first thing you can do is sort of rein in the branding as best you can. Make sure that the logo is being used consistently, that your documents all mirror one another, that your fonts are all the same, that your colors are the right colors and they're the same, your margins are consistent. Like, just some base level foundational cleanup of things, and pull back things that maybe are rogue or that people have done on their own. And because that consistency is worth its weight in gold. So that's the first thing I would do for sure. You may not need to rebrand. Maybe you just need to clean up what's going on and sort of lean into consistency.
Excellent. We have a question from Kate who says, how did you navigate phasing out old templates and documents? I already have to fight with coworkers to stop using letterhead with an address that changed in 2016. Kate, we feel you, right? But I'm hesitant to delete documents from our shared drive to ensure that people don't use them. That's a great question, because you're kind of in this phase too.
I'm absolutely in this phase. And you know, my recommendation is on rebrand, I mean, you take the long view. So you don't have to do it all on day one or month one, but hopefully at the end of the year, most of it's changed. 2016 is sort of a long view. I think that, you know, any existing templates should be archived. You know, they should go away from anywhere. And if you can put yourself in the process to prevent those things from going out, you know, if I don't know how rampant this issue is, if it's one or two individuals, maybe you can talk to their supervisor or do a session with them and like connect them with the tools that they need to do the job moving forward. You know, you should make the do's and don'ts, those templates available pretty easily so that people can do the work they need to do. You know, that kind of thing will never go away. But we have some evergreen documents at my organization that won't change. Our old annual reports, we're not going to rebrand those. You know, there's certain important of respecting the history and the organization that was. This is just turning the page. Mm-hmm. And so winning people over on a personal basis, that's what I've tried to do. But again, you're that brand champion, you're the coach and the cop. So lean into the coach part. And if you need to, you know, try to heavy up and be at the cop.
Exactly. I love it. That's such great advice, Bill. And I would add to that, in addition to, you know, because we're all like, we're giving you these tools. Here's a tool. Here's a tool. This is what we want you to do. We're doing a lot of telling. If you're seeing that people are still using old things or doing things their own way, sitting down with them and asking them, what is it that made you use this? Is there something that this piece has in it? Is it a way that it works? Is it where it's stored? What is it that's making you gravitate to using this document? How can we create something for you that will allow you to, you know, work in the new system that still works with you? People really appreciate being asked and knowing that you're there to help them get their job done. If you're only, like Bill was talking about the 3 different roles that he has, if all they see is the brand cop role, you know, if you're an organization with a bunch of lawyers or scientists, they don't care. Like they don't care about this, and we have to try and make them care. Which I guess Bill brings us to our next question, Bill. Someone's asking, how did you build? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just one more thought. I love what you said, Beth. And I think recognizing and rewarding people when they use the right brand. And if you have a little budget that you could buy some branded trinkets, you can reward people with, you know, a keychain or umbrella or a coffee mug when they do it correctly. Just positive reinforcement is good.
You know what? I feel like, you know, there's an old Pinky and the Brain. There's an old cartoon that used to be on television called Pinky and the Brain. And it's about these 2 lab rats that are like trapped in a thing. And one's a genius and one's a goofball. And they decided that every episode they're trying to take over the world. And one of the episodes, they make a paper mache Earth, and they want to get all the humans off the Earth so that they can have the real Earth to themselves. And their big sales point was they're going to give away free t-shirts to go. And, you know, do not underestimate the power of a mug or a t-shirt, especially when you're rebranding. People really want the swag. It's so crazy, but people love that. I have family members that get upset if one person has one mug that like somebody else doesn't have for my company. It's so funny. Okay, so someone else is asking how you built excitement. It's a great question to lead into this. When you did the rollout of the new brand, did you trickle it out, or did you guys ever do like any sort of a launch type of an event?
So given this whole project was a heavy lift, we did not do a launch event. I think the plan, so this was sort of a soft launch, because there's still social channels and things that we're updating and platforms that we're updating the logo on. So we're not 110% there. We will have our first in-person board meeting in October. And I think that is an appropriate time to do more of a formal launch, because everything will be much more developed at that point, and we'll have a lot more of the brand in everyone's place and faces, new signage, all those things. And so I think a brand event is really important, both for the volunteers and board and staff and external partners, but I don't think you have to do it on day one. And you know, my hair, you can't see, but my hair is gray from rebuilding a website and launching this. It's a heavy lift. So give yourself permission not to do everything at once on day one. People won't remember on day 3 that the logo wasn't yet updated on your timesheet platform. But a year later, they're going to remember your brand because it's all the same.
It's so true. Like the thing we always say is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, we all see brands as they exist now, and you don't see that like all the internal documents were changing for a while. I've got a question in from Caitlin, but I just want to stay on this topic for 1 second. As I'm sure you guys are all hearing, this didn't happen overnight. And in a lot of ways, it's happened, the actual transition and creation has happened slower than Bill and I had hoped due to getting all the approvals and just the complexity of decisions that have had to get made and making sure that we have that buy-in from the right individuals. As we're talking about this idea of building excitement, you know, the team, the staff, internal people maybe saw the logo, you know, a year and a half ago, and you haven't yet had a launch event. How are you managing, you know, people's excitement / frustration? Like, you know, you and I, like the website project took forever, you know, as you were building it with the team there. How are you balancing keeping everyone's mood up with making everyone be patient?
So one thing, I kept a tight lid on the logo until it was launched, because if people had access to that, they would have started using it the day they saw it. And so protect your assets as if they're gold. I think it's important to provide regular updates. Even if you have the smallest of update and you feel like it may not be an update, it's okay to let people know what's going on. Oh, here's the tripwire that we fell in. This is why we're running behind. Oh, here's what we're dealing with now. So let people look behind the curtain a little bit. It lets them feel like they're a part of the team. And because there's nothing worse than being in the dark. And so letting people know what's going on, and it didn't always put me in the best light, but it's okay because people are understanding that this is hard and it's a big change. And my colleagues know how many documents we have and how complicated rewriting our language and messages are. So,
and they don't care.
Right. And so I think that's a good thing. And then just with a little humility, asking them or appreciating their patience. They're on your team and they want it to happen too. And so they're just frustrated because it's not happening.
Perfect. So we have a question from Caitlin. Caitlin works in a faith-based organization, and she says, I have departments trying to create their own logos and brand. How do I help them develop an identity without it going rogue over the brand identity? Oh, this is a big question. Bill, where would you start with that?
Well, you know, Beth, you're probably in a better position to answer this, but I think about brand architecture. You know, a family of brands with your organizational brand at the lead, but you can probably speak better to sort of that structure than me.
Yeah. And Caitlin, what I would say is, so you say you have departments trying to create their own logos and brand. How do I help them develop an identity? So the first question you need to ask yourself as an organization is, do you want that to be happening? Do you want to allow your departments to create different brand identities on their own? And at the end of the year, like if you imagine your mission and your vision, what will that all sum up to? We're doing a lot of work in brand hierarchy, as Bill's talking, like brand architecture. We often will call it brand hierarchy. What's your master brand? And then what are your sub brands underneath of it? And how do they relate to each other? Do you want them to relate in a loosely associated way. We've actually been doing some writing on our blog, in our emails, and in some carousel posts we've been posting up on LinkedIn and Instagram lately about a lot about brand hierarchy, because it happens to be involved in some work that we're doing right now. So it's like, oh, that's a great time to be writing about it. But really the first thing you have to do is decide, like, are we going to let people create their own things, or do we need to centralize that? And if you're going to let them create their own things, are you okay with, we call it like a product strategy. So if you think of something like Procter & Gamble, you know, they're a product company and they have Tide, they have Downy, they have Colgate toothbrush. If you pick up a box of Colgate toothpaste, you don't necessarily know or even care that Procter & Gamble is the company that owns that brand. You may be that kind of an organization, that each of your own entities, each of your departments stands alone and has a strong brand, and getting that name out there is the most important thing for your organization. The downside to that is then a lot of times nobody knows the master organization. Nobody knows the people at the top. The other, you know, sort of the opposite extreme of that is taking like the approach that a lot of colleges are taking now, which is that we call it the master brand strategy, which is, imagine in fact, any of you that might've been on for the session that we had with Justin Flax from the University of Pennsylvania, you know, a super tightly managed brand, which everybody's got the same logo, everybody's got the same name, and just the words change, master brand. There's other versions. There's an associated brand, so that you can just kind of keep color schemes the same and fonts the same. And sometimes when people are doing their own thing, that's sometimes the best approach, is to say, here are the fonts you can choose from. Here's the color palette that we're working with. Here's some of the iconography. We work with a private school up in Rochester, New York, and they have a seal, like a very formal, very structured seal. And in that seal is an oak leaf and an acorn. And so when we're creating, because they want their stuff to look all different, they don't need it to be super, super tight. So every time we're creating something, we're always thinking, what's their color palette, the greens, the burgundies, the different colors that they have, what are their fonts? And then what are other iconographies that kind of go with an acorn and a leaf? We've done things with a tree. So we've kind of created some things. If you give people zero direction, that's when they go rogue. Because if there's no rules, there's no rules to break. But if there's too many rules, you need to recognize that if you're going to keep a very strict rule-based organization, you're probably going to have to pull in all the execution into yourself to be sure that the rules will be met. So Caitlin, let me know if that's helpful. Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
Beth, that was excellent. The only thing I would add is those departments, with your help, should be doing the exact same brand development that sort of our organization went through. You need to know who it's for, like make them do the homework. What does it mean? How does it convey? How will it be used? Like, it shouldn't just be someone with like a design creating something. That you have to have meaning behind it. You have to have a strategy behind it. You have to have audiences behind it. And sometimes that makes it less fun. I don't think so, but then the end product will be much better if you do that and do everything that Beth said.
Excellent. Good. I'm so glad that was helpful. So we're coming up to about the end. I just want to check in to see, is there anybody that has any last question that we haven't answered that we can address for you today? And so I'm going to put that out there and we can answer one more question if it comes in. And with that, I will begin to start wrapping up to say, Bill, thank you so much for being here. So everyone pop in, was this conversation helpful? Is talking about the unsexy, the back end of a brand project useful and valuable to you? The reason we did this is because, you know, this is the invisible side of branding that nobody ever sees. Everybody sees that big launch with the new logo and the new website and ta-da, but it's important to talk about the work and the mechanics of it. What we find is that many people in our community are slash marketers trying to do a little bit of everything. And it really does, like, this work falls a lot on you and the figuring things out. And so one thing that I would like to say to everybody is, number one, I think on like the 22nd of July, we're doing our first class in our new brand, Elements of Branding series. It's a new course that we have out, brand new. And we're going to be doing that class on doing a communication audit. And hopefully that's something that might be helpful. You can look, when we send you a follow-up and the replay to this, you'll be able to see some of the things that we have. Oh yeah, Megan says it's the 21st. Thank goodness Megan is here, knows what's going on. Yes, you will be getting the replay recording of this. So we've got all these things coming up. We also have recently launched a LinkedIn newsletter called Focal Point, where we're talking about all things branding. So if you, we'll be sending you a link so that you can subscribe to that newsletter. We have a new Instagram page where we have great, fun little graphics that are talking about some of these concepts, brand hierarchy, managing things, style guides, all the sort of key aspects of these conversations. And we're always interested in hearing from you. What are the things that are getting you guys stuck with branding, with what you're working on with brand strategy, brand awareness, brand identity, all of these different things. And the last thing is we have a couple of new resources that may be helpful for you. We have a document, it's a little explainer that's 2 pages that is called, what do we mean by branding? So, you know, Bill talked a little bit about brand strategy. Sometimes brand strategy is the right project. Sometimes brand identity is the right project. Sometimes you might want to do brand strategy, but when you do an analysis on your organization and your capacity, you might come to the realization that you actually are better off focusing on a different type of a project. So we have a couple of new tools that you'll start seeing if you follow any of our stuff, that you can download. This new assessment, this question on are you internally ready, is are you ready for a rebrand document? And so if anybody wants anything particular or has questions about anything particular, please feel free to email me. I can either send you the documents that you're looking for, or I'm always happy to set up a 30-minute intro call, just a conversation with anyone, no matter where you are on your branding journey, to just talk about, you know, what are the questions you're having, and maybe I can point you in the right direction. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Sarah, it's lovely to see you. And we have one last question that's popping in here, so I'm just going to do this as we're wrapping up. So Sophia is saying, my company is going through a website redesign and we are looking to update our fonts and color scheme. Oh, so she's just, I thought it was a question, but it's just a note thing. So she said, this was a great conversation. So thank you very much, Sophia. Thanks to everyone else that popped in and let us know that this was helpful. It's really great feedback for us so that we know the kind of things that we are going to be talking about. Our next free session that we're going to be doing is going to be in September, and we're going to be pulling a panel of people. Bill, this is up your alley. We're going to be pulling a panel of people together to talk about how the current pandemic, how the crisis of staffing, and how all different levels of your staff, from your strategic vice presidents down to your direct service people or your line workers, how the transition and change with all of your staff, how that affects your ability to be effective branding, how that internal, the culture that Bill was talking about today, how when you have to build that culture out time and time again, when your staff is constantly changing or staying a short amount of time, or somebody that was hired to do this job is stretched so thin, how that impacts your brand, which is like kind of a different approach to branding that we don't usually talk about. So my goal is to get a couple of different people that are impacted by this or have some ideas that they can weigh in on this together to talk about this and have a really different conversation on this, the aspect of internal culture on brand. So I hope that that's something that is of interest to you. And thank you, Bill, for joining us today. I truly appreciate the opportunity that we have to work with you and your generosity in coming in and sharing your insight on the work that you've done, the work that we've done together, and all the work that's yet to be done. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Bill. And I look forward to seeing you all on, whatever sparks your interest that we're doing next. Take care and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.